The rain came down like the sky had a grudge. It was the kind of storm that split old oaks down the middle and sent trash cans rolling across lawns like tumbleweeds. The kind of storm that made people lock their doors, draw their curtains, and thank God they were inside. Lily Chin was not inside. She was standing on the third step of her back porch, in her purple rain boots and her dad's old baseball jacket, the one her mom kept saying she'd put away but never quite managed to, holding a flashlight and staring at the man curled up beneath her backyard oak tree. He was enormous. Even hunched against the base of the trunk with his knees pulled to his chest and his leather jacket soaked clean through, he looked like something carved out of rough granite. His hair was long, black streaked with silver, plastered flat against a face that had clearly been through a war or two. Tattoos crawled up his neck in intricate patterns that the rain made look like rivers on a map. A dented motorcycle helmet sat in the mud beside him. His boots were cracked at the toes, worn down to the heel on the inside edge the way boots get when a man has been walking the same crooked path for a very long time. Lily's flashlight beam caught the glint of something metal on his jacket, a patch she couldn't read from where she stood, and a small silver pin shaped like a raven with its wings spread wide. She could hear her mother's voice in her head. Never talk to strangers, especially ones who look like that. She had also heard her mother say, on 100 different nights, tucked into 100 different bedtimes. What kind of world would it be if nobody helped anybody? Lily stepped off the porch. "Mister," she called out, her voice swallowed almost instantly by the roar of the rain. "Mister, are you okay?" The man stirred. One eye cracked open, dark brown, bloodshot, confused, and he looked at the small girl standing 3 feet away from him in her purple boots, as if he wasn't entirely sure she was real. "Kid," he rasped, his voice like gravel being dragged across asphalt, "go back inside." "It's raining," she said, as if this was a fact he might have missed. "I noticed. You'll get sick. I've been sick before." Lily considered this. The rain drummed on her hood. Lightning flickered somewhere to the east, and in its white flash she saw his face more clearly, the deep-set exhaustion in the lines around his eyes, the way his jaw was clenched not with aggression, but with a kind of stubborn endurance, like a man who had decided long ago that he would not ask for anything from anyone, and was holding that line even in a storm that had been going for 3 hours. "I have a treehouse," she said. "It has a roof. It's dry." The man stared at her. "Your parents know you're out here talking to strangers?" "My mom's asleep. My dad's." She paused just a fraction of a second, the practiced pause of a child who has learned exactly how long to hold that space before moving on. "Not here anymore." Something shifted in those dark eyes. Something that wasn't pity. It was subtler than pity and more honest. More like recognition. "I'm Lily," she said, and extended her small hand with the gravity of someone who had been taught that proper introductions matter and had decided this principle applied without exception. After a long, strange moment, the kind of moment that folds time into itself so that a few seconds becomes something you remember forever, the big man reached out and shook it. His hand swallowed hers completely. "Ghost," he said. "That's a funny name." "Yeah." Something crossed his face that was almost a smile. "I know." She pointed to a different oak tree, a different one, older and more massive, rising from the far corner of the yard with the quiet authority of something that has outlasted everything around it. The treehouse was nestled in its high branches like a wooden bird's nest, 10 feet off the ground, accessible by a rope ladder, with a plywood door painted green and a tin roof that was currently performing its own percussion concert in the rain. "Come on," Lily said. "I'll get you a blanket." She turned and walked across the wet grass without looking back, entirely confident that he would follow. And after another long moment, in which Marcus Ghost Harrington, CEO of Harrington Industries, a man worth $4.7 billion, a man who had navigated boardrooms and back alleys and hostile negotiations with equal authority, a man who had not been genuinely surprised by anything in approximately 11 years. He picked up his helmet, pushed himself to his feet, and followed an 8-year-old girl across a rain-soaked backyard. Later, in the therapy sessions he would eventually be persuaded to attend, he would identify this as the moment his life changed for the second time. The treehouse smelled like sawdust, pine sap, old crayons, and something that took him a moment to identify: home. Not his home. He wasn't sure he'd ever had one of those. But the category of home, The smell of it, the temperature of it, the quality of safety that a child pours into a space when she loves it enough. It was bigger than Ghost had expected, roughly the size of a generous walk-in closet, with two small windows whose shutters kept out most of the rain, a child's sleeping bag rolled up in one corner, a plastic storage bin full of art supplies, a shelf of paperback books whose spines had been broken and rebroken from countless readings, and a hand-lettered sign tacked above the door in careful, imperfect capitals, the Lily Palace. Dragons allowed. Mean people are not. He had to fold himself nearly in half to get through the door. The rain hammered the tin roof in a steady, almost rhythmic insistence. Ghost sat against the far wall with his knees up, his wet jacket draped over the plastic bin to dry, and watched the door. Exactly 3 minutes later, Lily came back up the rope ladder with the focused determination of a military supply operation. She was carrying a blanket printed with cartoon horses, a peanut butter sandwich wrapped in a paper towel, a juice box, and a small battery-powered lantern. She set the lantern in the middle of the floor. It threw warm yellow light across the small space, and the shadows became the comfortable kind. "Mom keeps snacks in the kitchen," she explained, handing him the sandwich and the juice box with complete seriousness. "She won't notice. She buys too many." Ghost looked at the sandwich, looked at the juice box, grape-flavored, with a little cartoon face on it. It had a small straw attached to the side with a strip of plastic. He could not remember the last time someone had made him a sandwich. That wasn't entirely true. He had chefs. He had personal assistants who managed his dietary requirements with spreadsheet-level precision. He had a kitchen in his Manhattan penthouse that was larger than this entire backyard. But someone making him a sandwich, someone doing it because he looked hungry and the right thing to do was simple, and so they did it. He genuinely could not place when that had last happened. If it ever had. "You didn't have to do this," he said. "I know," said Lily, settling cross-legged on the floor across from him with the easy confidence of a sovereign in her own territory. "I wanted to." He ate. The sandwich was simple and good. The juice box required a level of fine motor coordination that his large hands struggled with, and Lily watched him wrestle with the tiny straw with an expression of patient amusement before wordlessly taking the box from him, inserting the straw herself with practiced efficiency, and handing it back without comment. He drank grape juice from a cartoon box in a 10-foot square treehouse in the middle of a Connecticut thunderstorm. "Where are you going?" she asked. "Nowhere in particular." "Where did you come from?" "A ways back." She processed this. "My grandpa used to say that some people are travelers and some people are settlers. He said both kinds are necessary for the world." "Smart man, your grandpa." "He died when I was 5, but I remember the things he said." She picked at a loose thread on the horse blanket she'd kept for herself, her eyes cast down with the particular focus children use when they're about to say something that matters. "Did you used to have a home?" Ghost looked at her. There were 100 ways to answer that question. The penthouse in Manhattan, the estate in Greenwich, the farmhouse in Montana he purchased and visited exactly twice. "I had places," he said carefully. "I'm not sure any of them were homes." Lily nodded as if this made complete sense. "A home is where people are glad you're there," she said, with the certainty of someone who has thought about this and arrived at a conclusion she intends to stand by. "That's what I think, anyway." Ghost was quiet for a moment. "That's a good definition," he said. They talked for a while longer. She asked about his motorcycle, about where he'd ridden, about what the stars looked like from highways and places with no city lights. He told her about crossing Nevada at 3 in the morning when the sky was so dense with stars it looked solid. He told her about a dog he'd had once named Hammer, who had been the best judge of character he'd ever met and who had died when Marcus was 35 and left a space that nothing had quite filled. "I'm good at judging character too," Lily said. "That's why I invited you in." "How do you know your judgment was right?" She looked at him with those enormous dark eyes. "Because you shook my hand like I was a real person instead of just a kid," she said. "Grown-ups who shake kids' hands like they mean it are always good ones." Ghost had nothing to say to that. Lily eventually curled up on her side with her horse blanket and fell asleep with the easy, total trust of a child who had made her decision and saw no reason to second-guess it. Her breathing slowed and deepened within minutes. Ghost did not sleep. He sat with his back against the planked wall and his long legs stretched out before him and watched the door with the old habit of vigilance that 20 years of corporate strategy had never quite replaced the original version of. He listened to the rain. He looked at the sleeping child and the lantern and the broken-spined books and the sign about dragons, and he turned the question over and over in the way he'd been turning it since he arrived in Millbrook, the question that was not really about Victor Crane or the housing development or the evidence he was gathering. What are you doing this for, really? Who are you doing this for? He was still trying to find an honest answer when the first gray light of dawn came in through the treehouse windows, and the rain finally stopped, and the whole wet world outside went very quiet and very clean. 3 weeks before the storm, Marcus Harrington had sat in the glass and steel corner office on the 47th floor of the Harrington Tower in Manhattan and listened to his head of charitable investments lay out the problem with the precise, compassionate intensity that had made her one of the 3 people in his organization he trusted without reservation. Dr. Anita Patel was 45, with sharp eyes behind sharp glasses, and she had spent 15 years doing the exact kind of work that most people in her field talked about and most organizations did badly. She was not talking now. She was showing him. The satellite image on the conference room display showed a neighborhood that looked, from above, like a patchwork quilt. Small houses, modest lots. The organic street layout of a place that had grown from use rather than been designed from a plan. The kind of neighborhood that looks unremarkable until you have been inside it long enough to understand that it is, in fact, irreplaceable. Millbrook, Anita said. Working-class neighborhood outside Hartford. Predominantly immigrant and first-generation families. West African, Vietnamese, Chinese, Puerto Rican, some long-time white working-class residents. Average household income $62,000. Average home tenure 23 years. She clicked to the next slide. The Harrington Foundation's Affordable Housing Initiative had identified this district as a priority development zone. We want to build 200 units of permanently affordable housing, a community center, green space, a model for what community-led development can look like. And the problem? Marcus said, Victor Crane. The name occupied the room the way bad weather occupies a room. Victor Crane was, on paper, a successful commercial real estate developer based in Hartford with an estimated portfolio of $200 million and a reputation as a sharp but legitimate businessman. He had the right donations to the right foundations, the right appearances at the right civic events, the right smile in the right photographs. He was also, based on 18 months of investigative work that Anita's team had quietly assembled through a combination of financial forensics, court record analysis, and source interviews across 3 states, a predatory fraud who specialized in acquiring distressed and semi-distressed properties through a systematic program of intimidation, manufactured code violations, municipal corruption, legal harassment, and the exploitation of vulnerable people's fear and exhaustion. He had done it in Providence. He had done it in Bridgeport. He had done it in a neighborhood in Worcester that had taken 6 years to partially recover. He was doing it in Millbrook now, and he was further along than any of the previous operations had been when anyone had tried to stop him. He's been buying properties at 15 to 20 cents on market value, Anita said. Families with 30-year roots. He uses manufactured code violations to create legal liability, combines that with lawsuit threats against any seller who engages with outside buyers, and supplements with direct intimidation through local proxies. He has 2 members of the Hartford City Council on what appear to be informal retainers, and a building inspector named Phil Garrity, who has been accepting cash in exchange for selective enforcement. She paused. By the time he's assembled his parcel, he'll have a site large enough for a luxury mixed-use development. 0 affordable units. Marcus looked at the satellite image for a long time. Can we outbid him for the properties? We've tried 3 times in the past 4 months. Each time, his legal team files injunctions against the sellers within 48 hours of their engaging with us. Spurious claims about title history or undisclosed liens that take months to unwind. He's buying time while continuing to acquire. Police. Local department is compromised at the supervisory level. There's a community officer, Ray Mendez, who's been filing reports that are being buried. FBI Financial Crimes has been approached and has expressed interest, but they need primary documentation that Millbrook sources are afraid to provide because Crane's people have made the consequences of cooperation very clear. Marcus had closed the folder. I'll go myself, he said. There was a silence. As yourself? Anita asked carefully. As Ghost, he said. He saw her absorb this. She knew his history, the years before Harrington Industries, the decade and a half he'd spent on the other side of the line that separated boardrooms from back alleys. She knew about the Iron Ravens Motorcycle Club, the Eastern chapter he'd ridden with through his 20s, the years of odd jobs and long roads, and the kind of life that teaches you things that cannot be learned in any school or office. She knew about the mentor who had found him at 26, a retired engineer named Paul Gatto who had seen the quality of mind behind the leather jacket and the highway miles and had said, "Son, I'm going to show you what you could build if you wanted to, and change the direction of everything." She knew that Marcus Harrington was most himself not in glass towers but on the ground, among people, with his hands in the real thing. "Cover?" she asked. Homeless biker passing through, down on his luck, looking for work. He almost smiled. "I used to actually be most of that. You were never homeless. Tent in a Nevada campground for 3 months when I was 22. Semantics." He stood. "I need Danny." Danny, Ratchet, Flores had been Marcus's road brother since they were both 23 and riding with the Ravens through the kind of nights that either break a friendship immediately or make it permanent. He was now 46, lived in New Haven, ran a legitimate motorcycle repair shop that had won 3 regional service awards, and was the only person outside of Anita and Marcus's security team who would know where Marcus was going and why. "Will he do it?" Anita asked. "He always does," Marcus said. Within 48 hours, Marcus had transferred operational authority to his COO, climbed onto his 1987 Harley Sportster, the oldest and most battered machine in his collection, kept specifically because it remembered what it felt like before everything, and ridden north into a story that he did not yet know would change him more than he would change it. Emma Chen found out at 6:47 in the morning. She had woken up early as she always did before her 7:30 shift at Hartford General, gone downstairs to start coffee, looked out the kitchen window into the backyard, and saw a 6'3" tattooed man in a soaked leather jacket climbing down the rope ladder of her daughter's treehouse. The sound she made was somewhere between a word and a scream and something that had no category. By the time Ghost boots hit the wet ground, Emma was already out the back door with her phone in her hand and her thumb hovering over the 9 and 9/11, wearing her pajamas and her nursing shift expression, the one that had made hospital administrators twice her size take involuntary steps backward. "Don't move," she said. Her voice was completely level. She was genuinely frightened, but she had learned 15 years ago in an emergency room that terror and steadiness are not mutually exclusive states. They coexist. You choose which one gets to drive. Don't you move 1 inch. Ghost stopped. He held up both hands with the slow, deliberate care of someone who has been in enough high-tension situations to know exactly what not to do. He looked. Emma noticed despite every alarm in her body telling her to focus only on threat assessment. Genuinely alarmed. Not the way a predator looks when caught, which she had seen, but the way a decent person looks when they realize they have inadvertently caused someone harm that they did not intend. "Ma'am," he said, "I can explain. You were in my daughter's treehouse." The words came out in the precise, clipped register of absolute fury held at arm's length by professional discipline. "She invited me. Last night in the storm. I know how that sounds. Lily." Emma called up toward the treehouse without taking her eyes off the man. "Lily, come down right now." The plywood door swung open and Lily's had appeared. Her hair a magnificent disaster from sleeping without brushing. Her expression that of someone who has done something they believe was entirely correct, but who was beginning to appreciate that they perhaps should have done more advanced planning around the morning after element. "Hi, Mom," she said. "Lily Grace Chun, come down here." Now. Lily descended the rope ladder with dignity. She stood in the wet grass between her mother and Ghost and looked up at Emma with those enormous dark eyes, and said, calmly and without apology, "He was sleeping in the rain. I couldn't leave him there. You could have woken me up. You worked a double shift. You were really tired." Emma looked at her daughter. She looked at the man standing 10 feet away with his hands still raised. She looked at her phone. She did not dial. "What's your name?" she asked. "Marcus," he said, which was true, at least. "Marcus what?" A fraction of a pause, barely perceptible. "Harrison. Where are you from?" "Originally." "Bridgeport." Also true. Emma studied him with the full forensic attention she brought to everything she assessed. She was a nurse. She had spent 15 years reading people in states of crisis, reading the difference between someone who was dangerous and someone who was broken, someone predatory and someone lost. It was not a perfect skill, but she had it, and she had learned to trust it in the way you trust things that have saved your life more than once. What she read in this man's face was not threat. It was exhaustion, certainly, and something beneath the exhaustion, a quality of careful deliberateness, as if every word he chose was being selected from a range of possible words he had considered and found wanting. He was not entirely who he appeared to be. She could see that clearly. But the misrepresentation was not, her instincts told her, in the service of harm. She also noticed, filing it away without deciding what to do with it yet, that when Lily had climbed down the ladder and positioned herself between them, he had shifted his weight subtly to put his body between both of them in the back fence. Not aggressively, almost unconsciously, as if his first reflex, when startled and uncertain, was to shield the people smaller than him. "You need to leave," she said. "Yes, ma'am." "And you," she pointed at Lily, "inside. Breakfast." Now, Ghost lowered his hands. He bent to pick up his helmet from beside the oak tree. He was already moving toward the back gate when Lily's voice cut through the morning. "Will you come back tonight?" Emma closed her eyes. Ghost looked at the child. Then he looked at Emma, a look that was entirely, honestly deferential. Not manipulative. Just, "This is not my call. That's not up to me," he said quietly. Emma Chin stood in her backyard in her pajamas with her phone in her hand, and the morning light coming pale and clean over the fence, and her daughter looking at her with those inherited eyes, and the man standing at the gate with his cracked boots and his raven pin and his careful, layered honesty. And she made a decision she would spend 3 days questioning and the rest of her life being glad she made. "There's a coffee can on the back porch," she said. "I keep my spare key in it, for emergencies. The treehouse locks from the inside." She held his gaze directly. "My son is 11 years old, and he is not afraid of anything, and I will know if a single object in this yard is so much as moved." Ghost looked at her for a long moment. Something in his face, the deep lines around his eyes, the set of his jaw, shifted almost imperceptibly towards something warmer. "I understand," he said. "Good," said Emma Chun, and turned and took her daughter inside. Over the following 2 weeks, a quiet pattern established itself in the Chun backyard and, by slow extension, on Maple Street itself. Ghost disappeared during the days. He moved through the neighborhood and the surrounding blocks with the practiced invisibility of a man who had spent years making himself hard to notice, a skill developed in the Iron Ravens long before it became professionally useful. Eyes open and recording, conversations easy and unhurried, slowly assembling the full architecture of Victor Crane's operation. He had photographed 3 instances of Crane's associates threatening property owners, twice on doorsteps, once in a parking lot with a quality of menace that the camera captured clearly. He had documented 2 more cash exchanges between Crane's proxies and city officials, including a second envelope passed to Phil Garrity outside the same diner on Oak Street, with a regularity that suggested neither party had ever considered getting more creative. He had identified the 2 city council members on Crane's informal payroll through a cross-reference of their voting records on zoning matters and their financial disclosure forms, which, when you knew what you were looking for, told a fairly complete story. He had also found Danny. Danny Ratchet Flores had ridden up from New Haven on his own old machine and taken a room at a motel on Route 9, available on a call, visible only when necessary. His background in actual MC culture gave him access to information channels that Marcus's corporate infrastructure couldn't reach. The networks of people who talk to bikers the way they don't talk to anyone else, because bikers occupy a category that is neither civilian nor authority nor criminal, and so become, in the right circumstances, the people everybody tells things to. "You look better," Danny said when they met at a diner 2 towns over. He studied Marcus across the table with the precise attention of 2 decades of knowing someone. "Less like you're carrying everything by yourself." Marcus thought about a horse print blanket and a peanut butter sandwich and a sign that said mean people are not allowed. "Found somewhere decent to sleep," he said. Danny looked at him for a moment longer, then let it go. He had learned, over 20 years, which questions Marcus would eventually answer without being asked. In the evenings, Ghost returned to the Chun yard through the back alley. Always careful, never at a consistent time, always quiet. The second night, he found a bag hanging on the rope ladder, a change of clothes, jeans, a flannel shirt, a pair of wool socks, and a note in handwriting that was working hard at neatness. "These were my dad's, they might fit." The socks are new. All the clothes were too short in the leg and too tight in the shoulder, and he wore them every day anyway. On the fourth evening, he found Lily in the treehouse, ostensibly completing a worksheet on multiplication but transparently waiting for him. They had fallen into conversation with the ease of people who share a fundamental frequency, which has nothing to do with age or circumstance and everything to do with the quality of attention two people are willing to pay each other. She told him about school, about Mrs. Patterson who was fair but uncompromising about spelling, about her best friend Amara who was funnier than anyone else at school but didn't know it, about Jake who was excellent at soccer and at being wrong about things but refused to admit either quality. Ghost listened with the full attention he brought to everything, and occasionally offered, carefully and vaguely but honestly, what it felt like to cross a state line on a motorcycle at dawn, how you navigated by stars when the highway was empty enough to let you look up, what Hammer the dog had been like in the particulars, his habit of sitting on feet, his reliable alarm system that distinguished between people with good intentions and people without. How did he know? Lily asked. I never completely figured that out, Ghost said. I think dogs read something we've stopped being able to read in each other. I can read it, Lily said, without any particular pride, as simple fact. I know, he said. One evening in the second week, Emma appeared at the treehouse door after the children were asleep. She was carrying 2 mugs of coffee, and she handed him one and sat in the doorway with her feet on the top rung of the ladder and looked out at the neighborhood with an expression that was tired and watchful and fierce in equal measure. Something's happening on this street, she said. You've noticed. It was not a question. He had noticed. Crane's operation was escalating in the way such operations escalate when they sense a deadline approaching. The pressure increasing because the momentum of the scheme requires purchase before resistance can organize. A silver sedan had been parked outside the Nguyen house for 3 consecutive days, conspicuous in its conspicuousness. A letter had been sent to Mr. Huang about alleged fire code deficiencies that bore every hallmark of Garrity's manufactured violations. A trash fire had been set behind the property of Mr. Osei, the elderly Ghanaian man on the corner who had refused for separate purchase offers and showed every sign of continuing to refuse them until he was given a reason to do otherwise. I've noticed, Ghost said. Emma looked at him sideways, the calibrating look that he had come to recognize as her version of the assessment she had made that first morning, ongoing and continuously updated. Who are you, she asked. Not accusatory. Genuinely asking. Someone who wants what you want for this neighborhood, he said. That's the most honest answer I can give you right now. She turned that over for a moment. Are you in danger? Nothing I can't manage. Are we? He held her eyes directly. I won't let that happen. Emma-chun looked back out at the street, at the porch lights of the houses she had lived among for 6 years, the oak trees and the front yards and the block that her children walked and her neighbors inhabited. She drank her coffee. There's a community meeting Thursday, she said. At the rec center. People are frightened. They need, I don't know what they need. Something to hold on to. I'll be there, Ghost said. Emma nodded once, finished her coffee, and went back inside. Victor Crane had built his entire professional life on a single operational premise. Everyone has a price, and the ones who claim they don't simply haven't been made the right offer yet. It was, in his experience, a premise that held. Building inspectors had prices. City council members had prices. Lawyers had prices. Community organizers, the idealistic ones who showed up at neighborhood meetings with coffee and righteous energy, had prices, though theirs were usually more complicated, involving a combination of financial pressure and the right kind of legal threat carefully calibrated to exhaust their conviction without quite breaking it. Even the most principled people, faced with sufficient sustained difficulty, discovered that their principles had a practical limit. He sat in the leather chair of his Hartford office and looked at the file Tom Bull Wallace had placed on his desk. Tom was built with the solid, angular economy of a man designed specifically for intimidation, not tall exactly, but wide in the way that occupies space beyond its actual dimensions. He had small eyes that moved constantly, cataloging. Tell me about the biker, Victor said. Showed up approximately 2 weeks ago. No fixed address in the area. Goes by Ghost. Spends the days moving around the neighborhood, talking to people. Evenings he's at a property on Maple Street, the Chin House. The nurse. Right. She's been resistant to the purchase offer. The biker seems to have established some kind of arrangement there. Tom's small eyes moved. He's been at the community meetings. He spoke at the last one, gave people specific instructions about documentation, told them to photograph, record, date, and timestamp. Victor's jaw tightened. That's coached. That's not a transient. I know. Who is he? We ran him through every database we have access to. No criminal record. No consistent address in the past 6 months. Before that, a residential address in New Haven. No employer on record. Tom paused. Clean. Maybe too clean. People who are too clean for their apparent situation are hiding something, Victor said. He looked at the file for another moment. I want him gone. Discredited, not physically. I'm not an idiot. But I want the neighborhood scared of him instead of scared of us. Can you do that? I can do that. And the Chin property. She's been holding out long enough. Find me a violation. Victor turned to look out the window at the city that he had spent 2 decades learning to read as an extraction map, identifying the seams between what people believed was protected and what actually was. Make it substantial. Tom nodded and stood. At the door, he paused. The biker was at the Osei property last week. The old man said someone warned him about the letter before it arrived. Gave him time to get a lawyer. Victor looked up from the window. Then move faster, he said. The Thursday community meeting had been, in Marcus's measured assessment, a turning point. 53 people had filled the rec center gymnasium, which was more than any of the previous 3 meetings combined. They had come cautious, many of them, with the particular wariness of people who have learned that collective action attracts retaliation and that showing up publicly is a form of commitment with real consequences. They had come anyway. Ghost had sat in the back row and watched the community think together, watched the way fear and solidarity competed for space in the room, the way information shared across familiar lines created unexpected connections, the way Mr. Osei's calm, witnessed presence gave other people permission to speak more than any facilitation technique could have. He had sat quietly for most of it, taking in the texture of what was actually happening rather than the surface narrative of what was being said. He spoke once, toward the end, when the conversation had stalled in the particular mud of grievance without direction, when people knew what was wrong and knew they were angry and did not yet know what to do with that. He stood up. In the Iron Ravens, they had called it the road voice, the register Marcus used when the group was scattered or confused and needed to find its center again. It was not loud. It was the opposite of loud. It was the voice that worked precisely because it didn't try to dominate. The reason he's doing this to you, Marcus said, is that he believes you'll give up. Everything you're experiencing, the pressure, the legal threats, the manufactured violations, the cars parked on your street, it's not random. It's a system. It's designed to make you believe you're alone in this, and that resistance is more expensive than compliance. He's wrong on both counts. But you have to document everything. Every threat, every suspicious vehicle, every letter. Write it down, photograph it, record it, date and timestamp it. You are building a record, and records, in the hands of the right people, are the most powerful thing that exists. The room was quiet. Mr. Osei, who had survived things that made Victor Crane look like a minor misunderstanding in the accounting of human cruelty, turned in his chair to look at the man in the back row. He's right, Mr. Osei said, with the finality of someone whose word in a room carries the weight of everything he has earned and endured. We document. We share everything we have with each other. We hold. After the meeting, Officer Ray Mendez caught up with Ghost in the parking lot. Mendez was 35 and had the specific worn quality of a person who is trying to do their job correctly inside a system that keeps finding creative ways to prevent them. He had filed 8 detailed reports in the past 8 months. Every single one had been quietly archived without action by his supervisors. You know a lot about how this kind of operation works, Ray said. Not accusatory. Observational. I've seen it before, Ghost said. Where? Providence. Bridgeport. Worcester. He watched Ray's face absorb this. I'm going to ask you something directly. When I move on this, and I am going to move on it, and soon, I'm going to need a law enforcement officer who is ready to act on evidence the moment it becomes available. Not in a day. Not pending review. Ready. Ray looked at him for a long time. He was assessing the same thing Emma had assessed, in the same way honest people assess things. Not trying to catch out a lie, but trying to determine where the truth actually was. If the evidence is real, Ray said, I'm ready. Ghost held out his hand. Ray took it. 3 days later, Ghost's encrypted device contained enough material to construct a comprehensive criminal case against Victor Crane, Tom Wallace, Phil Garrity, and both compromised city council members. He had composed an encrypted message to Anita Patel that said simply, "Ready. Prepare legal team, DA package, FBI contact, and media. Move on my signal." The signal, he estimated, was 4 or 5 days away. He had not counted on Victor Crane being afraid enough to move first. It happened on a Tuesday afternoon when the sky was flat and gray and the neighborhood had the particular stillness of a place holding its breath. Ghost came back to Maple Street at 2 o'clock to find a Hartford police cruiser parked directly in front of the Chin house. 2 uniformed officers stood on the front walk. Tom Bull. Wallace was on the sidewalk 20 feet away, not interacting with the police, but watching with the expression of a man who has set a trap and is waiting at a comfortable distance for it to close. Ghost kept walking, past the house, past the cruiser, around the block. He pulled out his phone and called Danny before he'd turned the first corner. "They moved," he said. "I know." Danny had been working the street-level information network all morning. False B&E complaint filed this morning with Hartford PD, transient matching your description, allegedly broke into a vacant property on Oak Street 2 nights ago. The property is owned through a shell company that traces back to Crane in 4 steps. So I'm being made radioactive. Everything you've said at those community meetings gets tainted. Anyone who's been associated with you becomes a liability. The Chins get targeted specifically because of the connection. Danny paused. Bull's people are already going door to door on Maple Street, talking to neighbors. Ghost turned the corner back onto Maple Street from the far end, maintaining distance. He could see Emma's car in the driveway. She'd come home early, which meant she'd heard. He could see the rigid set of her shoulders in the front doorway, talking to the officers with her arms crossed, the stance of a woman doing the most controlled thing she could think of while under duress. And he could see, just barely, through the upstairs window, the small silhouette of Lily standing at the glass, watching. Marcus stopped walking. He had operated undercover operations before, not personal ones like this, but corporate intelligence situations where maintaining cover was the strategic priority and personal exposure was the enemy of the mission. He knew, with the cold clarity that 15 years of high-stakes decision-making had installed in him, that the correct tactical choice was to withdraw, go to ground, allow Anita's legal team to operate from clean distance, submit the evidence through protected channels, let the system do what the system was positioned to do. He looked at the window, at the shape of the child behind the glass. He thought about a grape juice box and a horseprint blanket and the question, "Are you going to be okay?" Like, for real. "Danny," he said, "call Anita. Tell her we're moving tonight. Not in 4 days. Tonight." "Marcus." "Tonight," he said. "And Danny, get here." He put the phone in his pocket and walked toward the house. By 4 o'clock, the damage was moving through the neighborhood the way damage moves through communities that have been made fragile by months of sustained pressure, fast, and along the paths of least resistance. Sarah Nguyen, who had been one of the most active voices at the Thursday meeting, stood on her porch and watched Ghost approach the Chun house with an expression that had traveled, in the course of an afternoon, from familiarity to concern to the particular hardness that forms when fear is given a justifying story to attach itself to. She did not speak. She looked away. The corner store was shuttered when it should have been open. 2 neighbors who had nodded at him on the street all week found sudden reasons to be looking elsewhere. The social fabric of the block, which had been building towards something like collective courage, was tearing along exactly the seams Victor Crane had calculated it would. Emma was at the kitchen table when Ghost came through the back. She looked up. Her face was arranged in the specific way, careful, exact, controlled, that people use when they are performing composure because the alternative is not practical. "They said you broke into a property on Oak Street," she said. "I didn't." "I know." She said it immediately, without qualification, which was not what he had expected and which landed somewhere in his chest with more weight than he was prepared for. "But," he said, because he could see the but coming. "But Jake got into a fight at school today. Someone said something about us." She pressed 2 fingers to her forehead, a gesture he had come to recognize as Emma Chin's version of a deep breath. "I have 2 children, Marcus. I have a job at a hospital where my reputation matters. I cannot afford." She stopped. "I know," he said. "I'm going to fix this." I need until tonight. From the hallway came the sound of feet on the stairs, and then Lily was in the kitchen doorway in her school clothes with her backpack still on her back and the expression of someone who has been waiting to be part of this conversation and has decided that waiting is over. Did they try to get you arrested? She asked Ghost. They tried, he said. Did you do anything wrong? No. She nodded once, firm and immediate. She unshouldered her backpack and set it on the floor. Then we have to tell people that, she said. Lily, Emma began. No. Lily looked at her mother with the patience of someone who loves you and is about to disagree with you anyway. Mrs. Patterson says when something wrong is happening and you stay quiet, you become part of the wrong. She says silence isn't the same as being innocent. Emma closed her eyes briefly. There are people outside, Lily said. I saw them from upstairs. People from the street, gathering on the sidewalk. Emma went to the window. There were 9 or 10 neighbors on the sidewalk. Not an angry crowd, not a threatening one, but the kind of gathering that assembles when a community senses the ground shifting and isn't yet sure which direction the fall will go. I'm going out there, Lily said. Lily, no. But Lily was already moving toward the front door with her mother's walk, the one Emma saw in the mirror and couldn't argue with even when she desperately wanted to. And Emma looked at Ghost, and Ghost looked at Emma, and he said, very quietly, "She's your daughter." God help me, said Emma Chun, and followed. Lily stood on the front porch in her school clothes, her backpack hastily re-shouldered, its clasp still clicking from her adjustment, and looked at her neighbors with the direct, unself-conscious authority of someone who is right and knows it, and has not yet accumulated enough lived experience to understand why that shouldn't be enough. The gathering on the sidewalk, 10, now 11 people, including Mr. Osei, who had appeared from his house with his cane and his witnessed patience, looked back at her. Emma stood in the doorway behind her. Ghost stood 3 feet further back. I know what they're saying about him, Lily said. Her voice carried with perfect clarity in the still afternoon air, the way children's voices always carry, cutting through adult noise. And it's not true. Saren Gwyn shifted her weight. Lily, sweetheart, he's been sleeping in my treehouse, Lily said, for 2 weeks. And before that, he told my mom about the car watching the Gwyn's house. And before that, he found out about the letter that was going to be sent to Mr. Osei, so Mr. Osei could get a lawyer before it came. A silence that was not nothing. Mr. Osei turned his ancient, weighing eyes from Lily to Ghost, and then to the gathering. I received a warning, he said, slowly, about the letter, from a man on a motorcycle who came to my door one evening and said he thought I should know what was coming. I didn't tell anyone, because I wasn't certain how much to trust it. He paused. But I got a lawyer. The letter came. My lawyer was prepared. Heads turned. The meeting Thursday, Mr. Huang said, from the edge of the group. It was him. Told us to document everything. I've been photographing every vehicle that sits in front of my store. He pulled out his phone. I have 39 photographs. 44, said a woman named Grace from 3 houses down, holding up her own phone. 51 for my block, said a man Ghost recognized from the meeting. The sidewalk stirred, the specific kind of movement that happens when scattered information finds its pattern. He watched the neighbors look at each other, comparing what they'd each been holding separately, and felt the thing he'd felt at the community meeting beginning to rebuild itself, faster and more certain than before. And then Tom Bull, Wallace, came around the corner. He had 2 of Crane's associates with him, and behind them, with the practiced, unhurried arrival of a man who believes he controls every room he enters, came Victor Crane himself. He was tall and silver-haired and wearing a coat that cost more than most people's monthly expenses, and he had the particular warmth of someone who has used charm as a precision instrument for so long it has become the only expression he remembers how to make. I'm sorry to interrupt what looks like a neighborly gathering, he said, with a smile that did not reach his eyes by approximately 6 inches. He found Ghost on the porch with a glance, and let the glance say what his words didn't. I understand there's been a complaint filed, a matter for the police to sort out. He turned the warmth on the crowd. I want you all to know that I have this community's long-term well-being at heart. The stories you've been hearing about my development plans, about predatory practices, are being circulated by outside individuals with their own agendas, who don't understand or care about this neighborhood the way those of us with a long-term investment do. Lily stepped off the porch. She walked across the front yard and out the gate and stopped on the sidewalk and looked up at Victor Crane, who was nearly twice her height and dressed in clothing that cost more than everything in her house combined. And she said, in the same carrying voice that had started all of this, "You're the one who set the fire behind Mr. Osei's house." The sidewalk went absolutely still. Victor Crane looked down at the child with the first expression Ghost had seen on his face that was neither calculated warmth nor cold instruction. He was surprised. And behind the surprise was something harder, the calculation beginning again, the reassessment of what level of threat an 8-year-old actually represented. "Lily," Emma said from the porch, her voice controlled and carrying everything she was holding back. "We have recordings," Lily said. She was not guessing. She had ears that never stopped working, and over 2 weeks she had heard pieces of what Ghost had been doing, more than any adult had intended her to hear. "And photographs. And we have proof about the building inspector and the money. We have all of it, don't we?" She looked back at Ghost. Her eyes asked the question, "Don't we? Is now the time?" Ghost looked at Victor Crane. He looked at the sidewalk full of his neighbors, their phones in their hands, their documentation assembled, their fear not gone, but no longer in control. He looked at Ray Mendez, who had appeared at the edge of the gathering at some point in the last 2 minutes, radio on his hip. He reached into his jacket, not the outer pocket, the inner lining, where he'd kept his real phone for 4 weeks. He called Anita. She answered before the first ring had finished. "Send everything," he said. "Now." All recipients simultaneously. "We're done waiting." "Sending," Anita said. He could hear keyboards in the background. Not one, several. He lowered the phone. He looked at Victor Crane. "In approximately 4 minutes," Marcus said, in the boardroom voice, the one that his COO said made time feel like it was working for him rather than against him. The Hartford County District Attorney, the Connecticut Attorney General, the FBI Financial Crimes Division, and 6 journalists will simultaneously receive a complete documented case covering every transaction, every bribe, every manufactured violation, and every threat you have conducted in this neighborhood over the past 14 months. The building inspector, the council members, the shell companies, the Providence case, the Bridgeport case, the Worcester case. He held Crane's eyes. "It's over." Victor Crane stared at him. The warmth was gone. The practiced composure was still there, by reflex, but something behind it had cracked. "Who are you?" he said. Marcus looked at the raven pin on his lapel. Then he looked at Lily, who was watching him with complete, quiet confidence. The face of someone who set the right sequence of events in motion weeks ago and has simply been waiting for the world to catch up. Someone who got the right offer, Marcus said. The next 48 hours were a controlled demolition, precisely sequenced. Anita Patel had built the evidence package over 4 weeks with the methodical precision of someone who understood that justice is not a matter of moral weight, but of documentation, and that the job of documentation is to make denial impossible rather than merely difficult. By the time Ghost's call came, the package was complete, cross-referenced, and triple-verified. Digital recordings, time-stamped photographs, financial records obtained through legitimate discovery in related proceedings, sworn testimonies from victims of Crane's previous operations in 3 other cities, and a memorandum of 26 pages prepared by 2 former federal prosecutors who had reviewed the materials and described them, in writing, as among the most comprehensively evidenced municipal corruption cases they had encountered in their combined 41 years of practice. It was delivered simultaneously to all intended recipients within 7 minutes of Marcus's call. Victor Crane was arrested at his Hartford office at 8:15 the following morning, before he had the chance to make the first of what would have been several consequential phone calls. Tom Bull, Wallace accepted a plea deal by noon, which was not surprising. Men who specialize in doing other people's dirty work tend to have a strongly developed sense of their own liability. Phil Garrity, the building inspector, was suspended by the city pending investigation before sunset. His suspension became termination before the week was out, followed shortly by an indictment. The 2 city council members issued resignation statements within 24 hours, citing, in identical language that suggested a shared attorney, personal reasons, which was one way to describe being implicated in 7 years of documented bribery. Officer Ray Mendez found that the 8 reports he had filed and seen buried were suddenly objects of very considerable interest to very senior people in the Connecticut Attorney General's office. He was commended in writing within 2 weeks. He was promoted within 30 days. He was, finally and at long last, given the latitude to do the job he had always been trying to do. Marcus Harrington held a press conference. He wore his usual clothes, charcoal suit, white shirt, but he had kept the raven pin. He stood at a podium in the lobby of the Hartford Civic Center with Anita Patel on his right and 3 of the best lawyers in the state on his left, and he told the story of Millbrook and Victor Crane with the lucid, documented precision of someone who had spent 4 weeks building an unassailable case. He also told a different story, a shorter one. I came here undercover because it was the most effective way to gather the evidence we needed, he said. But I want to be honest about something I got wrong. I came here believing that what this community needed was someone to intervene on their behalf, to use resources and strategy they didn't have, to rescue something. He paused for long enough that the room went quiet in the way rooms go quiet when they understand they are about to hear something real. That wasn't what I found. What I found was a community that was already fighting, already documenting, already holding each other up through sustained, deliberately manufactured fear. These people didn't need saving. They needed the predator removed and the system made to function the way it's supposed to. Those are very different things. And the difference matters. He stopped again. What I found in Millbrook, he said, and this time the pause was because he was finding words for something that had not had them before and was resisting the particular kind of professional polish that could make those words smaller than they needed to be, was people who know what a neighborhood is, who know what it means to belong somewhere and to be responsible for that belonging. That knowledge is not replaceable. It cannot be built. It can only be protected. The video of a little girl standing on a sidewalk in front of Victor Crane was on social media within an hour of the press conference. By evening, 11 million people had watched Lily Chun tell a corrupt developer, in her clear, carrying voice, what she knew and why it mattered. By the following morning, that number had tripled. Lily watched the video on the kitchen tablet while eating cereal before school. I look weird, she said. You look brave, Emma told her. Same thing sometimes, said Jake, from behind his own bowl, which was the most genuinely philosophical thing he had produced in his 11 years, and which everyone in the kitchen let stand without commentary because it was, simply, correct. The morning after the press conference, Marcus came to the front door of the Chen house. Not through the back alley. Not at night. He came to the front door, in the morning light, with his actual face and his actual name, and knocked. Emma opened it. She was in her scrubs. She had a shift in 2 hours, and she looked at him with the careful, continuous assessment she had been running since the morning she found him in her backyard. The same assessment, updated daily with new information, arriving at new conclusions. You owe me an explanation, she said. Several, he said. Can I come in? They sat at the kitchen table, him, Emma, Jake, and Lily, and he told them everything. Not the version he had given at the press conference, which was true but shaped for public consumption. The real version, the company, the foundation, the reason he'd come to Millbrook specifically, the reason he had chosen this particular approach, and why he had not told them who he was. He was direct about it, without the softening that comes from wanting to seem better than you were. He said, I used your home and your goodness as resources for something you had not agreed to, and I told you less than you deserve to know. I should have been more honest. I'm telling you now because you earned the full truth, and I should have given it to you sooner. Jake listened with the complete, unsparing attention of an 11-year-old who had decided that no adult was getting forgiveness without evidence of genuine remorse, and who had a litigator's instinct for when remorse was authentic and when it was performance. Emma listened with her hands wrapped around her mug and her eyes direct and her face giving away less than she felt, which was a significant amount. Lily listened and then said, I knew you weren't really homeless. Everyone looked at her. Not the whole time, she said, stirring her cereal with the air of someone offering clarification. By the end of the first week, you folded the blanket corners exactly the same way every morning, like you were used to making things precise. You didn't have the right smell for someone who hadn't showered in a long time, and you had a phone in your jacket that you never took out in front of us. She looked at him with those enormous dark eyes. I thought maybe you were a private investigator, or a spy. Jake stared at his sister. You're 8, he said. Almost 9, she said. Marcus looked at this child, at the precision and the patience and the fundamental generous certainty she moved through the world with. He felt something shift in his chest that had been locked in place since he was considerably younger than any of them. "You're right," he said. "I wasn't honest enough. I'm sorry." Lily considered this with the judicial seriousness she brought to important questions. "Are you going to fix the neighborhood?" she said. "Not in a taking over way. In a this belongs to the people who live here way." "That's exactly what I intend," he said, "with the community's direction and agreement." "Then I forgive you," she said, with the clean finality of a verdict. "You should also apologize to Mr. Osei. He's been through a lot, and he deserves a real one. I'll go today. And fix the park. The swings have been broken for 2 years. The city keeps saying they'll come. I'll fix the park. The corner ones too, not just the main. All the swings," Marcus said. "Every single one. I promise." Emma, across the table, was engaged in what appeared to be a fairly significant effort not to smile, and was not entirely winning. 6 months later, Millbrook looked different. Not unrecognizable. The Harrington Foundation's first commitment to the Community Council, which had been formally constituted with elected representation from 28 households, had been precise and binding. "We do not change what this place is. We build what it wants to become." The 200 units of permanently affordable housing were under construction on the parcel that had been Victor Crane's target, designed by an architecture firm that had spent 10 weeks in genuine consultation with residents before drawing a single line, and that had produced buildings that looked, improbably, like they belonged there, like they had always been meant to arrive. The community center had broken ground on the formerly vacant lot on Sycamore Street. The park's swings were fixed, all of them, the corner ones and the main ones, new hardware and fresh paint in colors chosen by a vote of the neighborhood's children. A mural stretched the full length of the side wall of Mr. Huang's corner store, painted over 6 weekends by neighborhood kids working alongside a professional muralist who Marcus had found specifically because she understood that the job was not to impose, but to make visible what was already there. The mural showed the history of the block in vivid, specific detail, the families and the migrations and the decades and the small heroisms that don't make the news, but are the actual architecture of any place worth caring about. Phil Garrity's criminal trial was progressing toward the outcome that the evidence had always made inevitable. Victor Crane had pled guilty to 7 federal charges: fraud, bribery, conspiracy, and 3 others that his attorney had worked hard to avoid and failed, and was looking at 12 to 14 years, which was, by any fair measure, less than he deserved and more than he had ever imagined possible. The 2 former city council members were in the process of discovering the full professional and legal consequences of the choices they had made, a process that would occupy them for some time. Marcus returned to Millbrook regularly, not in disguise, not wearing the role of either the homeless biker or the arriving billionaire. He came as himself, which was a combination of both and something beyond either, for community council meetings, construction reviews, and the occasional Saturday when he put on work clothes and joined the crew. His personal stylist had strong feelings about the work clothes. He had stopped having his calls returned on the subject. He and Danny took a long weekend ride through the Connecticut hills in the 5th month, the kind of ride that has no destination and is therefore entirely about the traveling. Danny listened to the things Marcus had been carrying for 20 years with the same patience he'd always had, and at the end said, "Man, you needed a kid to make you a sandwich before any of this moved." Apparently, Marcus said. "Ghost," Danny said. "You are one complicated human being." "Working on it," Marcus said. And he was. That was the difference. Before Millbrook, the working on it had been theoretical, acknowledged in the abstract the way people acknowledge things that they have decided to address at an unspecified later date. Now it was actual. He had found a therapist, a quiet, perceptive man named Dr. Theodore Park who had the right combination of rigor and patience, and was engaged in the slow, non-linear, occasionally uncomfortable process of being honest about the things he had been carrying. It was not comfortable. It was the most useful thing he had done in years. Emma Chun received a call in the 4th month from Hartford General Hospital's chief of medicine, offering her the position of charge nurse for the emergency department, a promotion she had been passed over for twice in the previous 3 years. She had her own suspicions about why those previous decisions had gone the way they had. Suspicions that Anita Patel had quietly validated through a review of the hospital's internal records that occurred as a routine part of a Harrington Foundation philanthropic assessment. Emma accepted the position and called Marcus to tell him because she found, to her own mild surprise, that she wanted to tell him and had decided to stop overthinking what that meant. "You earned that," he said. "Completely." "I know," she said. "I just wanted to tell someone." There was a silence on the line that was not uncomfortable. The kind of silence that settles between people who have been through something real together and have arrived at a place where they are honest about what is there, even when what is there is still being figured out. "I'm glad you told me," he said. Jake joined both the soccer team and the debate team and was fiercely good at both, which surprised everyone who had not spent time actually watching him. He maintained his position that no adult was to be trusted without ongoing evidence of trustworthiness. But he had added Marcus to the category of adults who were required to keep earning it rather than a category that had already failed, which was progress by any measure. And Lily started a project. She called it the Raven Book. It began as a single notebook and became two, and then a binder, and then a shared digital document when the binder ran out of space. She collected the stories of the neighborhood, not the story of the crisis, though that was in there, but the stories of the people, how they had come, what they had built, what they had feared, what they had held, what they had decided to be in the middle of the hardest year the block could remember. She interviewed Mr. Osei, who had a story that occupied 40 pages and needed more. She interviewed Mrs. Tran, the elderly Vietnamese woman from Sycamore Street, who had kept her porch light on throughout the worst of it, and whose own history was its own kind of epic, moving and specific and full of a kind of courage that didn't announce itself. She interviewed Grace, who had 44 photographs on her phone. She interviewed Mr. Huang, who cried a little at the third question and then apologized for it, and whom Lily told not to apologize because some things earned tears, and that was fine. She interviewed Danny Ratchet Flores, who had taken a lease on a workshop space in Hartford because he liked the neighborhood, and because Marcus had made staying practically easy without quite asking. Danny's interview was 45 minutes long, and Lily ran out of notebook space twice, and had to borrow the back of a paper bag from Mr. Huang's store. She interviewed Officer Ray Mendez, who now had the authority to actually do the job he'd always been trying to do, and who had things to say about that were worth documenting. She interviewed Marcus last. They sat in the treehouse, him folded nearly in half against the wall, her cross-legged on her sleeping bag, with her notebook and a pencil and the battery lantern and the rain that seemed, the neighborhood had decided, to have a permanent role in the meaningful moments of this particular story, as if the sky understood its function. She asked him many questions, carefully and thoroughly, in the way she asked everything, with real attention to the answers, without filling the silence he sometimes needed to find the honest version. "What was the moment you decided to fix everything?" she asked. He thought about it carefully, the way he thought about things that mattered. "I don't think there was a single moment," he said. "I think it was a lot of smaller moments that accumulated into something I couldn't ignore anymore." "What was the smallest one?" He looked at the lantern, at the shelf of broken-spined books, at the sign that said Dragons Allowed. "A little girl in purple rain boots," he said, "who decided that being afraid was less important than being kind." Lily wrote this down slowly, making sure of every letter, because Mrs. Patterson had very high standards for spelling and because this particular sentence deserved to be written correctly. "I was afraid, though," she said, not looking up from the notebook. "I was scared when I walked up to him. I was scared the morning Mom found him. I was scared when I went out on the porch that day." "I know," he said. She looked up. "But I did it anyway." "Yeah," Marcus said. "That's what brave is. That's the whole definition. Not the absence of fear, just the decision that something matters more." Lily considered this, turning it over the way she turned things over, and then she wrote that down too. "Are you going to be okay?" she asked. The same question she had asked him weeks ago, in this same space, with the same directness. Like for real, not just the company and the houses and everything. "You." Marcus Harrington, who had built an industry from a tent in a Nevada campground, and a mentor who believed in him, who had survived things that had no good name, who had spent 20 years being relentlessly competent and substantially alone, who had come to a small neighborhood in a storm and been offered a peanut butter sandwich and a horse blanket by a child in purple rain boots, and had understood, somewhere beneath all his carefully maintained infrastructure, that this was the most important thing that had happened to him in a very long time. He sat in the treehouse and felt the question land where questions rarely landed anymore. "Yeah," he said, "I think I actually am." Lily nodded. She wrote it down. Outside, the rain did what rain does, fell and made the whole world clean and left it a little newer than it had been before. In the branches of the great oak tree, the treehouse held its place, small and sturdy and certain of what it was, as it had been through every storm, as it would be through the one still to come. A home, the kind where they're glad you're there,